Welcome to Dave and Dharm Demystify, a FinTech Futures podcast, helping make sense of the world of FinTech and digital finance. Please sit back and listen as the two Ds take a subject and discuss it to make it clearer and easier to understand.
Demystify.
Welcome, Alice, to the Dave and Dharm Demystify show. We're delighted to have you joining us all the way from Cheltenham, I believe. So I wonder if you could introduce yourself and talk a bit about what you do. And then we are going to be talking to you about the state of cybersecurity in this great nation of ours and beyond. So if you could start with an introduction, that would be marvellous.
Absolutely. So I own a content marketing agency based in Cheltenham, which is the heart of the UK's cybersecurity ecosystem because we've got GCHQ in Cheltenham. My background, I've worked in marketing for probably 14 or 15 years. I keep forgetting to add on the years as I age, so who knows how many years it's been now. I started in luxury marketing, actually. So I did 6 years working for two of the biggest luxury travel companies, Abercrombie & Kent and Audley Travel, doing lots of amazing travel, going around to beautiful places in Kenya, India, doing photography and content and things. And then in 2018, I moved into cybersecurity and I worked for Sophos in Oxford, which is a cybersecurity giant. And I worked in the naked security team there, which is like the media team. And we had a podcast. It was a news network. It would get millions of views. The podcast got about 60,000 listens a month. And it was all about making cybersecurity simple. And I was like a sponge and I learned so much and I absolutely loved the team and used to just leave work beaming and smiling and having laughed all day. It was just so much fun. And it really made me think, if someone like me from a luxury travel background can love cybersecurity this much, I'm pretty sure that it's just presented wrong. And so I saw it as a massive opportunity. And in 2021, I launched my own business. So nearly 5 years ago now. And we specialize in tech and cyber. And I kind of apply a lot of luxury marketing fundamentals. So things like tailored messaging, high end being the gold standard, very trust-based, loyal customers. I think all of that applied in cybersecurity, and also beautiful aesthetic branding, really kind of innovative, captivating storytelling. We try and bring a bit of glamour. So we do events at private members clubs and things. And I think we challenge the industry to speak more inclusively, but also to talk to people beyond the kind of stereotypical techie, because cybersecurity is no longer a silo. It is intrinsic to everything, especially from a business leadership perspective. And so making it accessible to more people, even from an end user perspective as well, in terms of the data you're using, the platforms we're using, AI and large language models, and understanding how they're trained, not running away from words like quantum, but running towards them and understanding them. So that's kind of my passion. And then I think about 1.5 years ago, maybe I launched my own podcast, which is Cyber Made Human. And that is kind of my passion project. And that's exactly what it sounds like. We get really interesting guests to talk about things like the quantum apocalypse or AI in therapeutic settings or whatever the big buzzword is right now, romance scams, and do a deep dive into them. And that also is a great way for me to learn loads about the industry and connect with some amazing people.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. Because, the reason we wanted to get you on is because Dharmesh and I on this podcast, we haven't actually touched a lot of cybersecurity from a kind of topic point of view. And what we wanted was somebody to kind of really help demystify what's going on and the things that perhaps going forward we should be going into in a bit more detail. I'd love to start with you just giving us a view as to what do you think are the kind of key trends in cybersecurity that you're seeing in terms of the conversations that you're having? And what are the things that the industry is sort of worrying about?
So I would say in terms of the conversation I'm having, it's definitely changed a lot in the last probably 2 or 3 years. And I would say that's because the mainstream has woken up to cybersecurity. So in the past, people didn't know what the word meant. And I think still a lot of people don't know what the word means. But it's not really acceptable if you're a CEO to not understand the risk landscape and the threat landscape, but also opportunity that cybersecurity presents as a business. And so I do think that with the kind of mainstream outages that we saw with CrowdStrike and Heathrow Airport, M&S, Co-op, all these big things that are happening and now being picked up in the media, I think is making the mainstream wake up to cybersecurity, one of the issues that I see is that a lot of companies will jump on that mainstream hype and make it very negative and scaremongery. And historically, cybersecurity has always been terrifying, scary, chuck a load of money at it and then you can sleep well. And I hate that approach. I think people need to understand what they're buying, be educated so that they can make an informed decision on their purchases. And I think the cybersecurity companies that are doing well understand that. They're not just terrifying their customers into buying their service. They are really showing them that this is not only a protection mechanism, it's also a business opportunity. If you are secure and M&S gets hacked, for example, I think Next took 10% of M&S's profits during the time that they were down. It's a business opportunity. And I think reframing the conversation is a big thing. So it's a kind of about education, using language that's more accessible, that kind of immersive storytelling that we talked about. We're still at the beginnings of that phase, but I do think as the mainstream media have woken up to it and end users know what the words mean, it means that the companies are having to kind of adjust how they communicate.
Why do you think that we don't talk enough about cybersecurity? I mean, because I certainly, and given that we mainly deal with kind of like fintechs and banks and, everyone wants to protect their money especially, there is obviously somebody's been given the task of like looking after cybersecurity in the bank, etc. But we're deeply immersed in that space and we don't hear this conversation often at all, right? And as Dave said, we're on to over 150 shows and we haven't covered cybersecurity yet. I'm just wondering, like, is it the fear factor or what is it you think that makes people not talk about such an important topic?
I think there's a few things, there's a few reasons. And the first one is the opacity of the industry and the terminology. So using words that people don't understand. And I think in an industry like FinTech, it's a good example that they're very kind of intelligent specialist people. And sometimes I think people don't want to admit that they don't know what something means. So when people are talking about data breaches or hacking or something like that, if you don't understand it in your senior leadership, you're not going to say, sorry, what do you mean by that? And I think there's a huge amount of assumed knowledge and also just kind of covered up maybe incompetence. And so that means that people aren't open to learning. And I do think there's a huge opportunity in the education space to educate C-suite leaders and bring them up to speed because cybersecurity changes all the time. I think it's one of the reasons I've done so well in this industry, coming from a completely different background, is because it merges and evolves constantly. So if I'd gone to university and studied computer science 10 years ago, it would be completely irrelevant now anyway. And so there is a real opportunity to keep staying up to speed with the terminology, but also I think putting things into context. So not using abstract terminology and putting it into the actual context of your business or your customer base will really help. There also could be an element that in FinTech, it is a given. I think we work with a lot of critical national infrastructure and also like MOD and government. And again, it's kind of a given because if you are working in that really kind of sensitive space with people's financial data, you probably do have a CISO, which is the Chief Information Security Officer, and maybe even a cybersecurity team. And therefore, it's just taken for granted that it's there. But actually, that is a big opportunity. And I think as end users wake up, the companies who talk more about, I think they call it secure by design is a new phrase that's coming up, which means, especially people who are based in Cheltenham who've got ex-GCHQ working for them, you can say we're secure by design because everything we build isn't about it being the best piece of software. It's about it being the most secure piece of software and the best. So I think those are a few reasons.
It's really interesting. So Dharmesh and I, when we first started dating, we actually spent a lot of time down in Cheltenham, didn't we, Dharm? So we got to know each other over a company called Eagle Star Direct. And so that was 97, 96, 97, so almost 30 years ago. At that stage, the internet the people who did anything to do with the internet were kind of found in the cupboard under the stairs, basically. I sort of feel like over 30 years now, it'd be ridiculous to say that the internet wasn't the kind of key channel for most businesses. Whereas at that stage, it was definitely a sort of not even a nice to have, it was the hobbyist dream type thing. And cybersecurity, it sort of feels like that was in the cupboard under the stairs and it's sort of slowly moving out. As you say, it's now a strategic function. So I think businesses have kind of recognized it's an existential issue that if they get wrong could absolutely kill them from a kind of shareholder value, profit, whatever customer kind of interaction point of view. I totally agree with what you're saying. I guess one of the things that's kind of interesting is like everything else that we're surrounded by in the world of technology at the moment, and particularly technology related to the internet, is just how things are speeding up. So how are people that you're talking to coping with the sort of rapid state of change in the industry?
I would say that, so in Cheltenham, we're really lucky that because there is such a vibrant cybersecurity community, we've got multiple offices dedicated to tech and cyber startups. I work out of one, which is amazing. Cynam, who are one of my clients, which means Cyber Cheltenham, is a community of about 7,000 members. And they host regular free events. They've just had Tech Week, which was completely free. We actually hosted a Cyber Human live episode as part of that. And people can go along and essentially collaborate with each other. So you'll have people from completely different industries. Like they do a lot with space, for example, and satellites, but also with agritech, fintech. And they'll bring people together from completely different industries to talk about emerging technology and the biggest conversations right now happening. And I think the networking afterwards, the talks are always incredible, but the networking and the conversations you have over a canapé afterwards actually are really incredible. And that's where a lot of my clients come from, is just those conversations. And I think the industry as well is incredibly trust-based because of the nature of it. Some of the content that's being talked about can be quite sensitive sometimes. A lot of these people work for like EDF, nuclear energy, places like that. They're securing literally critical national infrastructure. And so getting them all together in a room to learn and talk, I think is invaluable, basically. And that's one of the reasons as well that I started Cyber Made Human, because having access to all of those people, basically my guest list just appear in rooms at Cynam events. And I'm like, wow, can you come on the show? And then we talk about it. So in Cheltenham, that's a really good way of doing it. I think if you weren't lucky enough to be immersed in the cyber industry in Cheltenham like I am, then it would probably be through things like podcasts, to be honest.
I think I hear you on the C-suite, and probably having somebody on the C-suite that is responsible is a good idea. But from this, I guess, the CEO's perspective, because in the last few years, we've been actually shouting at CEOs to understand more about technology. And actually, the entire company understanding more about technology, whether you're a bank or an insurance company or whatever. But how much more can the CEO take on board in terms of learning? So I guess, that's my concern, is like, yes, they should be aware, but what is it the CEO should probably ask of the person below him? Like, how does he keep a check on that person doing the job? Because you actually really have to let the reins go and say, well, look, carry on. Like with the sales guy, you could say, well, look, here's the targets. This is what you need to sell, blah, blah, blah. This is where we're heading towards in terms of markets, etc. Really clear. And that's all in the standard business books, but none of the business books cover cyber. So could you give some advice to CEOs listening about what they should be asking of their CISOs?
I would say that it goes in the other direction, actually. So I would say it's the CISO's responsibility to tailor the messaging to the CEO. So with my marketing hat on, what I often find, like we'll work with startups who are looking to get an investor or a company that's trying to sell their cybersecurity service to the C-suite of a company. And they spend hours and hours talking about, this is all the technology and this is how it works and this is my background and this is bamboozling them with information, when actually all the CEO wants to know is this isn't going to lose your business any money. By having it, you can actually make more money, and just give them the bit that they need to know. And I think you're right that CEOs have a huge amount of responsibility as it is, and they are obviously profit driven. And I think that actually seeing cybersecurity as a business opportunity and not just a cost is also a way of reframing the conversation. That would be my key advice, is not getting too lost in the technical weeds. But also the really key thing to remember is that when you do suffer a cyber attack, you can have all the protection in the world and still suffer a cyber attack, because they're incredibly sophisticated. There are whole businesses with HR departments who have ransomware as a service that you can buy off the shelf, like M&S. I think we just did an episode on it in our Halloween special. I can't remember what they were called. Is it Scattered Spider is a ransomware as a service provider. And you are against very sophisticated attackers at this point. And so even if you spend all the money in the world, you cannot blame your CISO and your cybersecurity team if you do get breached, because that's the landscape we're operating in, unfortunately.
I mean, one thing that Dharmesh and I have covered in our podcast is Q-Day. And this relates particularly, I guess, to, well, it relates to everything, but it is a concern to finance companies. So is quantum something that people are talking about actively? Do people know about Q-Day? Do you think is enough being done to kind of raise the profile of Q-Day? And I should explain, so Q-Day is the day that quantum computers will be stable enough to crack RSA encryption, which means that anything which is encrypted with RSA is sort of open to the world. And it's not just a concern for future data. It's also, I think, even last week, there was an episode where I think China's been found to be harvesting data from the UK for store now, decrypt later as sort of part of that kind of Q-Day strategy. So I just wondered if that's something that is sort of cropping up.
Definitely. I think quantum is becoming a bigger buzzword. I think about a year ago, someone called Paul Ducklin, who is like an oracle in cybersecurity, speaks really plainly, but has worked in cyber for 35 years or something. He came on and we talked about the quantum apocalypse. And he basically demystified a lot of it and said that essentially it's just clickbait. Like quantum essentially just means being able to do something much quicker, because you can simultaneously do something you had to do individually a million times at once. So obviously, if you're trying to crack some encryption, instead of having to do it over 10 hours, you can do it in a second, because you can do it all in one time. And it's interesting because I think there's been a lot of events that I've gone to about quantum, and I've heard various different things. Some people, like I had Joe Cox from the University of Gloucestershire, who specialises in quantum and blockchains and things, come on, and he said that essentially, in order to have a quantum chip, it costs millions of pounds to keep it at the right temperature, and it's an incredibly expensive resource and intensive endeavour. So it's not going to become mainstream. But then I recently at Cyber Week with Cynam a couple of weeks ago went to a talk by a quantum specialist who was saying that now they've got little teeny weeny quantum chips that you can kind of just plug into your computer. And so I keep hearing kind of conflicting things. Some people are saying it's, a minimum of 10 years away before we're going to see quantum anywhere near us. And other people are saying it's closer than you think. So I think when we talk about Q-Day, a little bit of it is just the headlines talking about stuff that's going to get you to click on it. I think it probably is something that's coming up, but with the rate of technology evolving as it is, I'm pretty confident that as quantum evolves, so will the solution. I'm an optimist.
Yeah, likewise. I mean, in that game, I guess, of buzzwords, one thing that could accelerate quantum, I guess, is AI. But also AI on its own, I guess, adds a new dimension to cyber. I mean, I haven't really looked at it. Obviously, we know about all the stuff about deep fakes and the obvious bits and pieces, but can you tell us a bit more about the state of play of AI in cyber?
In terms of the cyber landscape, I would say that AI is going to massively increase hackers and bad actors' ability to act, because in the past where they would have had to manually write emails or manually do things, they can now do it on a much bigger scale and on a more sophisticated scale. So things like romance scams, social engineering. So romance scams is essentially when you pretend to be a partner or take someone's identity and pretend to be them in order to extract money out of your victim. And you could pretend to be based on an oil rig or in the army and send me some money and I'll send it you back. All of those sorts of things. In the past, you would have had somebody who at some point in the chain would have been obviously not who they said they were. Whereas now they could literally go on a video call with you, send a voice note, sounding and looking exactly like the person they're pretending to be. And we also see that in CEO scams. Recently, there was a scam where someone sent a voice note to the CFO of a company as the CEO saying, this is a secret deal. Please don't mention it to anybody. Can you transfer? I think it was $25 million. And they did it. And it wasn't the CEO. So it's things like that people need to be aware of. AI is definitely massively accelerating in terms of the amount of convincing attacks. But that's not necessarily for cyber companies. That's just a wider education. That's just consumers and general population of people having an awareness of that deepfakes exist and that phishing emails no longer have a typo in it and a random formatting and the dodgy email address. It's more about us as a population evolving to recognize those threats.
It's interesting you say that's not for cyber companies, because I would have said that like outreach is a massive opportunity for cyber companies. And I'm guessing that's sort of part of what you're doing is sort of trying to get them to think about that outreach side of things. So I love the fact you've got a podcast which is able to take a complex subject and kind of humanize it. I think that's fantastic. Do you think the cyber industry is really doing enough in that outreach, or could they be doing much more, do you think?
I think they're doing a lot. I think I'm spoiled in Cheltenham because I have all these incredible events on my doorstep and I share an office with them. So I'm immersed in it all day, every day. And what I see is really positive. But even when I worked at Sophos in Oxford on the Science Park, they'd be publishing white papers constantly. We had the Naked Security podcast. I do think there's a lot of companies that are really trying to share knowledge. Also, one of my former clients, the Information Security Forum based in London, they're all about educating essentially CISOs and CTOs and cyber specialists in companies on the latest threats. That's exactly what they do. And they hold like an annual meeting around the world to share that insight. So I think there is a lot of things happening. What I mean by it not being a cybersecurity company's responsibility is that if you're protecting the actual digital architecture of a company from being hacked, so patching the endpoints and doing all the actual technical stuff to make sure that the system cannot be accessible, you can make that as perfect as possible. But if someone can send a WhatsApp to your CTO saying transfer $25 million, it's irrelevant. You can have the best cybersecurity in the world. That was a human error. And there's a lot of that. A lot of the, I guess, issues that we're seeing are actually not technical. The technical infrastructure is pretty solid. It does tend to be human risk. And I think the reason I called my podcast Cyber Made Human is because the saying is that humans are the weakest link in cyber, but they're also the best protection. If we didn't have humans, we wouldn't have any of it. So it's about educating people and it is about knowledge. And cyber, it kind of goes back to your point earlier about CEOs having so much on their plate already. Can we really expect cybersecurity companies to kind of hold the burden of education if your job is to commercially sell, I don't know, a digital managed service to businesses? Is it your responsibility to also be hosting a podcast and doing all of that stuff? I definitely am an advocate for education and I think thought leadership is the marketing strategy. But I do think there's also a responsibility as a whole that as we saw with the internet becoming every part of daily life, so is cybersecurity. And I do think that individuals need to just take more responsibility of opening their eyes to the threats.
I really like what you said previously also about there's a theme coming across in what you're saying about education and raising awareness, which I think is deeply important. But for those people, as a previous CTO, I've dealt with CISOs as well, etc. We aren't naturally gifted at explaining technology in a simplest way. I can do it with stuff that I've been involved in personally, like writing code. But I've never really been involved in networks and cyber and stuff like that. So explaining some of that stuff, quantum even, right? I understand processes, etc. But it's difficult to explain. Do you think there's now more of a need for a marketing role that's almost inward facing? Because we kind of like look at marketing as an outward thing to sell the company's wares in effect, right? But do you think marketing needs to play a bigger role internally to explain all these things as well?
Definitely. I mean, a huge amount of what I do is educating my clients. So a huge amount of the proposal process or the pitching process is me educating my target clients on the value of marketing and the value of messaging. I think in the past, it's definitely been seen as get the marketing person to write the article or give the talk or whatever. And I think that the people behind cyber are what make it so interesting. And a lot of the people who come on my show have never, ever been on camera before. They're quite nervous to do it. And I purposefully don't record in a studio. We'll record in a gorgeous location on sofas, have the cameras up before we've even started recording so that they're there while we're chatting, so that when they come on, they feel more comfortable. And I think a huge amount of my role as a marketer is making people who are very technical and not public facing, helping them communicate effectively, essentially, and saying, like, when I had Joe Cox, lecturer from University of Gloucestershire on, I said, can you explain what a blockchain is? I was sitting there like, what? And so I said, let's do that again. What's a blockchain in simple language? Give me some kind of metaphor in the real world, something physical, and describe that as a blockchain. And he did it, and it was amazing. And so it's just reframing how they communicate is definitely important.
It's great. I mean, and it shows you that we're sort of in an era where I think marketing, people are sort of starting to scratch their heads and wonder whether we need marketing going forward. And I think what you're describing is the reason why it's kind of entirely necessary. So I wanted to talk a bit more about marketing, because what I love again about what you do is the focus that you've got. Now, many years ago, I don't know if you'll remember this, but someone grabbed me on a stairwell in a place called Goring, and he said, because I'd just come out of a company called Yellow Pages and joined this startup, and I was like finding being in a startup very difficult. And this gentleman said to me, he said, got a real opportunity, but my advice is you've got to focus. And for whatever reason, Dharmesh, what you saying that, the penny dropped for me. And I was like, yeah, I can see that's super. My career's then been very focused on financial services. So what I love is your focus on cyber and cybersecurity, because it means that you begin to understand it. People don't need to educate you. You get a more holistic view of what's going on. As a marketeer, are you sort of thinking about things like AI and the impact of AI? Are you sort of seeing that as an opportunity? Do you see it as a threat? Do you agree with what I'm saying around focus as well? I'm just kind of interested to get your kind of view overall.
I think when I launched my company, I wasn't sure whether to specialize in luxury or cyber, and they're obviously wildly different. And to begin with, I didn't niche. And so it meant that everybody would contact me and say, oh, I can see that you do cyber, so we won't ask you about our luxury safari. Or a cyber company would say, oh, we were going to ask you to do our managed service provider, but I can see you do luxury safari. And I was like, oh my God, this is really difficult because I'm not leaning into either of them. I look like I'm targeted at no one. So also the pandemic helped because it meant that luxury travel was on its knees. So I decided to specialize in cybersecurity. And I think one of the reasons for me as well is that cybersecurity is a scary topic. When you use words like blockchain, quantum, AI, most marketers leave the chat, which means that I basically stand out because I'm the only one left there talking to the person about it. And I'm actually genuinely interested and I genuinely understand it. And that is a massive USP. When I go to all these cyber events, I'm most of the time the only marketer in the room. And if I'm not, I'm the only marketer that understands what they're talking about. And one of the things that my clients say is that working with me, they feel like they can almost breathe a sigh of relief because they're like, oh, she just gets it. She knows what we mean when we mention Python or something. Whereas you're having to spend hours and hours telling your marketing agency what the F you're talking about. So I just see a huge opportunity in the complex industries because I don't shy away from complicated conversations. I actually run towards them. Also, I am a sponge for knowledge and I find it genuinely interesting. And I think there's a lot more philosophy and psychology involved in cybersecurity than people give it credit for. It sounds really complicated. And actually, when you get under the hood, it's such a fascinating and interesting industry. So that's kind of my niching story, I guess. And then in terms of AI and how that's impacting marketing, I guess it just helps my workflow. I see AI as a co-pilot. So we do a lot of video editing, obviously podcast production, and it can just finesse that process. Something that might have taken me 15 hours to edit might now take me 8 hours. But it's not taking me 8 minutes. It's still just part of the process. And I think 14 years of marketing experience and content production experience is still a huge part of that puzzle. And I think, if you want to get someone who's just graduated and doesn't have an eye for beautiful content or doesn't understand storytelling or doesn't understand marketing fundamentals or psychology of buying and get them to use AI, get them to use the same platforms as me, we'd have wildly different outcomes. So I think seeing it as more of something to support and elevate your skill set, not to replace it, is how I see it. And I think it's the same in cyber. If someone's worked at GCHQ for 20 years, giving them some AI to rely on, what a waste, when they've got all of that incredible knowledge that they can utilize. And I think if you become over-reliant on it, you also then actually become lazy and you switch off your kind of intellect a little bit. And I think that's dangerous, especially people who aren't fresh out of uni, who've got these years of experience. Use it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I've experimented with using some of the AIs for writing stuff. And some of the writing is like beautiful, but it's not my writing. And I also find that if I leave it to the AI, then I'm missing the bit that I enjoy the most, which is actually going through the article, making sure it flows, it makes sense, and doing the research behind some of the stuff. So yes, the research can be accelerated using AI, but then I just take its output to kind of put into my article. But I think the other thing that I realized as well is that I kind of thought marketing would shrink as well. But because there are so many platforms and now the demand for more content, there's actually more that needs to be put out. And you kind of need, like, you still need a bigger team, I think. I just can't see the team shrinking necessarily.
Well, imagine if we didn't have this conversation now and you just said to me, Alice, can you give me the top trends that you're currently seeing in cybersecurity marketing, blah, blah, blah. Ask me the same questions. And I'd popped it into ChatGPT, which has got all my history and it knows who I am, can give my perspective and tone of voice. You then each whacked in your answers using AI. The conversation would have been wildly different. Whereas because we've all sat together and actually engaged our brains and jumped off what different people are saying, it's a much more authentic and interesting conversation.
It is real. I mean, a long time ago, I wrote an article about how podcasts might save marketing as well. I mean, why would I say that? Well, I think the reality is podcasts enable this dialogue. So the conversation flows in a different way. Say we probably ended up at a different point than we all thought that we might do at the beginning of the conversation. But because it's a free-flowing conversation, it kind of enables us to do that. But I think the amount of information that's kind of comes out is phenomenal. So it's interesting because I just wrote an article and then notebook.ml, which is the Google kind of dynamic knowledge rendering kind of platform. You can do a video. The video is brilliant. You can do a podcast. The podcast is kind of good. But it kind of misses, this is all AI stuff, but it kind of misses that sort of human side of things. And the sort of nuance. So there's a lot which kind of goes on in terms of nuance through things like podcasts. So, but Dharmesh, you're right. I think that the reality is in this AI world, it's hungry for content. So it's not in AI's best interest to kind of rid the world of marketeers. It needs the marketeers and it needs more of the marketeers to kind of feed it with content. So it's a really good point. But listen, Alice, it's sort of been really fascinating. I mean, we've covered so much ground. Unfair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Dharmesh and I, we do a lot of work with fintech companies. Have you got any views on like how good or bad fintech companies are at marketing themselves? Any areas where they could improve?
I think fintech is a really fascinating and interesting area. And actually, interesting question because there's two companies in Gloucestershire. One's called, three, mine obviously, Alice Violet Creative, The Modern Firm and P3M. And P3M is cyber, The Modern Firm is digital infrastructure and I'm marketing. And we've teamed up to offer a digital solution. And we're primarily looking at finance, accounting and insurance because we see it as such an opportunity. And those are the companies who tend to be big. They have the kind of architecture that might need adjusting and they have the budget and the appetite for kind of evolving. And I think that what we found was that we were often recommending each other basically at different points in the buyer journey. And if we could team up and do it together, then at the point of the kickoff call, we can ask the questions about who's your brand specialist, what's your strategy, who's your target audience, while someone else is saying what systems do you use, who's your chief technology officer, do you have cybersecurity? And getting all of that in at the same point was quite an interesting opportunity. So that's something that we've just launched, which is this collaboration. We've got a launch party in December, actually. You two should come, Cheltenham. And come along.
As I say, that's where we had our first date, was down in Cheltenham.
Well, there you are. So I think there's a massive opportunity in fintech. I think there's some companies that are doing really interesting things. There's a company called Iris. Don't know if you guys know them, based in Cheltenham. They are global actually, but they've got an office in Cheltenham. I've done some video content with them, have some amazing, gorgeous offices, beautiful branding. I think there's a lot of opportunity in that industry and there's definitely an appetite for elevating, I would say.
Fantastic. Well, listen, thank you so much for joining us. It's been a really interesting, fascinating conversation.
Yeah.
So I think we've covered so much ground.
Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to Dave and Dharm Demystify. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe and tune in next time as we take another topic and demystify it.